Hello and welcome. My name is Megan Underberg, and I am joining you today with a presentation talking about the Japanese American camps, the pharmacists, and the experiences that occurred there. I've titled it Stories of Desperation and Hope, Pharmacists Inside and Outside the World War II Japanese American Camps. So thank you for having me, and sit back, relax, and enjoy a conversation about the years between 1942 and 1943. I am a pharmacist. I'm currently in Spokane, Washington, and also a faculty member with the WWII College of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. I originally don't think I thought about World War II until my dad and mom came back from a trip to Norway in 1985 when I was between 5th and 6th grade. And my dad shared with me stories that his cousin Olaf told him about his experiences as a resistance fighter in World War II in Norway when they were fighting the occupation of the Nazis. He shared stories of his involvement and also of additional cousins' involvement in the bombing and sabotage of the heavy water plant at Rjukan, which prevented the Nazis from developing and winning the race of the building of an atomic bomb weapon. Since that point in time, I became more interested in history. It was always just a little side note. I enjoyed it, picking up bits and pieces wherever I went. And then a series of lucky events, as I stated here, led me to find the journey of Japanese American pharmacists in World War II in America. And today is the story of those individuals. As many of you are well aware already, this is basically a review. On February 19th, 1942, on the heels of Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, our President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Executive Order 9066. Also, as many of you know, what came out of that was the change. Now, if we look at 9066 as that executive order, it did target the Axis powers, so Japan, Italy, and Germany. And yet, as we know, it wasn't typically the Italian Americans and the German Americans that were pulled from their communities and placed away and deemed a threat. No, it was the Japanese Americans that were deemed a threat on the West Coast in particular, with what they felt was the potential for spying, espionage, and other activities that would aid and abet Japan. This map always strikes a chord with me since I grew up in eastern Washington, as we have the little cursor right here. Spokane's here, and I grew up a little south of this direction. But basically, this line of demarcation marks that area of the individuals that were of Japanese ancestry, or Japanese American population. They initially, as many of you are well aware of, relocated to the assembly centers. And the assembly centers pulled our families and our individuals to isolate them and to prepare to move them to what we initially called relocation centers. There's been many, many names and euphemisms for this. At the end of the day, we truly had concentration camps here in the United States during World War II, where we did lock away our citizens, our Japanese Americans. The triangles do notate the actual camps where our families and individuals that were Japanese American and of Japanese ancestry, and they stretch pretty far, all the way over here to the south, Idaho, and into these other regions. It wasn't an easy time. When the notice came out from 9066, this is a copy of the notification posted in Washington State at Bainbridge Island. They were the first of the groups to be relocated first to Camp Harmony in Puyallup, and then they were relocated to the camps. It was an experience, and it went very, very quickly. People had very short notice to liquidate their businesses and all of their assets, including their homes. So what has this to do with pharmacists and pharmacy education, an example? Well, there's a massive intersection of pharmacist correspondence that was been hidden away for years, generations really. There's two sets of correspondences that we're going to look at today as a group. One are letters to an individual by the name of John Bonomi. He was actually a distributor for the Brunswig drug company in Los Angeles, California. And these letters are from pharmacists, typically in the year of 1942, during the height of the relocation to the assembly centers and then to the camps. It highlights the stories of the organized chaos, there's no better way to put it, and the needs within the early days of the assembly centers and the camps, before the supply lines were set up, before the government fulfilled their obligations. The other set of correspondence ties into TK Pharmacy in Denver, Colorado, and this has received some publicity in the news over the years from approximately, I would say, about 2012. The letters were coming to a pharmacist by the name of Yutaka, also went by Terasaki, who was the pharmacist of the store TK Pharmacy. In this one, there's little correspondence from pharmacist to pharmacist, but instead it's regular people writing from the camps for help from the TK Pharmacy. This is a later time frame. Usually it's pretty heavy in the year of 1943. So there is a bit of a difference, but there's actually a nice flow when you look at the correlation of these letters. So we're going to start first with the pharmacists of Little Tokyo in the Los Angeles area, and they often wrote to Dear Johnny Bonomi or John Bonomi. In general, there's 7 pharmacists that have their recurrent letters, and their names are listed here. We're going to highlight several of them. I realize for the time constraints that we have, I couldn't do all of them, but we have a good representation of them. Now, the major communication at this time, we must remember, this is in the 40s, is mostly by written word. Naturally, we didn't have email. We didn't have fax machines. So there was Western Union. You could send that. You could send postcards. You could send letters. And there was telephone at least available. Maybe not widespread in the rural areas, but those were our options. The incredible part of these letters, whether the ones that went to TK Pharmacy or the ones going to John Bonomi, is you can hear the voice of the people in them. And it's simply because they wrote and spoke in a language that we no longer have. It's English, but it's very succinct, it's very descriptive, and literally when you see and hear some of these today, you will feel as if you're sitting and talking to the people themselves. The other set of letters, as I alluded to, were found with TK Pharmacy. This is a photo from roughly, I estimate, the 60s-ish. To give a sense, now this is on the corner of Larimer Street in Denver, Colorado. The building is still there, and this is what it looks like. As you can see right there, the corner of Larimer Street in 2015. I was fortunate enough to be at a conference, and so I took a side trip down to see the building. It has been remodeled, but I want you to pay attention to this FM hall. We're going to circle back to this at a later time when we talk about TK Pharmacy and the role in the pharmacy, as well as supplying the Japanese Americans in the camp to meet their needs. The biggest thing I want you to think about right now is, with TK Pharmacy, when the walls talk, for this is when they pulled off the plasterboard, tucked in behind these walls were these amazing, incredible letters where the unforgettable stories emerged of the impact of the war on the regular citizen that was put away into the camps. Little Tokyo in the 1930s looked somewhat like this. This is a general picture. This one shows City Hall of Los Angeles, California, in the Little Tokyo region. And to give another reference, this is the Brunswig building where John Bonomi would have reported to work. He was apparently quite popular with the pharmacists in the Little Tokyo region, and they joked around a lot. And not only that, they had different events as families outside of work, where they went to each other's homes, they hosted each other, and they hung out as good friends. The first pharmacist that we're going to highlight is by the name of John Toshiyuki. We first meet John at the Fresno Assembly Center, where he wrote to John Bonomi on July 29th of 1942, and we get the sense of what's going on. So he notes in his letter, "I've been here since May 16th. I left Los Angeles on April 12th, and what you find when you read the entire letter is he actually thought by going to Fresno with his family, he wouldn't have to evacuate as soon as those people along the coast. As he notes, here it is just a little over 2 months later, I am here with my family, his wife and baby, and my parents. Now, to give a description for us, I'm going to call the younger generation of people, He is with his wife and baby in one room that's about 15 foot by 20 foot. He describes the barracks are made of pine board with tar roofing and tar paper on the wall. The floor is concrete. The beds have straw mattresses, and as he notes, it was rather hard to get accustomed at first to the new ways of living, but now we don't mind the inconvenience so much. I think he's being generous. Terribly generous. John continued with Mr. Bonomi and says, I would like to ask you a favor. I know you've always been very busy and I really hate to bother you, but have always been very kind in helping me, so I thought I would write to you. What I want to ask you is that I wish to order a few things through you and have you mail them to me. So he's reached that point where they need some things within the camp, and he's like, maybe my distributor that helped me out with my store and the things I ordered there could lend a hand to me now. His request was for a thermos vacuum filler for a quart-sized thermos bottle, and it was the style that had the red Bakelite cap. He requested a Tangy lipstick, natural color, in the large 89-cent size of tube, and also had a question if there'd be a way to access a radio, a small table set with about 5 or 6 tubes, not a shortwave radio, and a good brand such as RCA, Philco, Zenith. Didn't want to spend more than $15 and wasn't picky on the model. He'd let John Bonomi make a choice on that. We now know a little bit later, his next letter on August 7th, it looks like things worked out. He writes, thanks very much for your nice letter and also for taking care of my order. I was rather disappointed about the radio, but it's okay. I thought Brunswig handled radios. He writes a bit more in the actual letter that he would take the one that he had to the repair shop and hope they could get it back into functional capacity. Excuse me for being so formal in my last letter. I hope this one sounds a little better to you. My wife was very pleased over the Tangy lipstick you sent me, as it had a small powder and perfume combined with the lipstick. The vacuum filler fitted the thermos just right. So I can comment on this one. I even thought myself, if I were a woman and I'm in a camp and I was able to get a lipstick, a powder, and a perfume, it would have made my day and maybe made life feel a bit more bearable when it wasn't probably feeling terribly bearable at that point. The relationship between John Bonomi and the pharmacists, including what John Toshiyuki writes in this dialogue here, is from the same letter, and it really starts to point to this close relationship they had, working as well as personal. I wish now that I was in Santa Anita, because a lot of the pharmacists in Little Tokyo did go to Santa Anita. So you can come and visit me and bring me 1 case of Coca-Cola and a big watermelon, and also hear you throw the bull. Really, I am very lonesome here. I really miss the LA crowd. And now this next statement is telling of the times. It is sensitive when you think of where we are in our society today and how we speak, that we wouldn't most likely say this. But remember, this was written in 1943, and it's not to take anything away from anyone or to criticize any groups of people. This is just how it was. So he's reflecting now and realizing what happened. So the ex-Japanese town is dead, referring to Little Tokyo. It's really too bad. I wonder what the city is planning to do over there. I sure hate to hell to see a bunch of Jews get in there and make those stores into a secondhand junk and clothing stores. As I said, these are sensitive statements that are put out there, but it reflects the sentiments of the time. His final correspondence came September 12th of 1942. Everything's fine over here and we're all in good health so far. I think this place will be moving to a relocation center in Arkansas around October 5th or 15th. No definite date has been announced. And then, however, I understand Santa Anita people are moving out now. I wonder where Masi Masuoka will go, and hang on to that name for just 1 minute longer. My brother, who was in the Santa Anita, is leaving tomorrow, the 13th, for Heart Mountain, Wyoming. And just because I know I always like to get a sense of the people that we're relating to, this is John Toshiyuki upon his graduation in the mid-1930s from pharmacy school, 1936 from USC. We know from the 1950 census and from the other information they had, release information when he left to camp, He was at the Fresno Assembly Center, and we then can learn he went to the Jerome camp. Now, one thing I found really interesting in reading these records coming from the camps is they would register you as your primary occupation and your secondary occupation. So they registered him as a primary occupation as pharmacist, secondary occupation as a retail manager, and then they had potential occupation in Jerome, commercial artist. And I sighed a little when I read that because I know how valuable pharmacists are in healthcare, being one myself. And I struggled with that, as I'm sure many people have struggled in reviewing records. After the war, when he was 36, his wife was 30, and they had 2 boys, Ben and Stephen, ages 8 and 7. So it's kind of fun to see that life carried on, they moved on with everything, and if I recall correctly, he did continue to practice as a pharmacist. Now, remember I just mentioned Masi Masuoka. Now, Masi, formal name is Masaru Aurelius Masuoka. He's pictured here from his graduation, and he was writing to John Bonomi as well at this same exact time because his first correspondence to John was June 7th, 1942 from Arcadia, which is where the Santa Anita racetrack had its location for address purposes. The letter came from he and his wife, Kiku. Now, fascinating as well is they took with them their letterhead of their pharmacy, and it's fun when you look at it because you can backtrack where their store was. Theirs was called the Masuoka Pharmacy Prescription Specialist, and I always have to smile because I like the name. I love this. I said, look at that. I would have gone there as a patient, and I would have loved to have worked there as well. And there's their address in Los Angeles. Now, the next part I want you to notice, there's Masi listed with his degree at BS, his brother Shig, and another brother or cousin, Takashi, who has the PH chemistry. So they have 2 pharmacists and then this chemical background. Kiku wrote the first letter for she and her husband, and she writes to Dear Mr. and Mrs. Bonomi, please forgive us for not writing sooner, but it seems as though with all the time we have, we don't seem to do much writing. Another thing that has kept us from writing is the fact that we've had to change rooms 3 times. And this is at the racetrack. They've had to be repositioned 3 different times. They had to do this because they've increased the population capacity from 10,000 to almost 19,000. And I reflect on that and think we go from 10,000, which is a large capacity of people, to almost double that at that 19,000 mark. Kiku goes on to highlight the role of Masi in his new role here at the racetrack at the Assembly Center. We have at present 1 hospital with a staff of 6 doctors, 6 registered nurses, 3 lab technicians, and 3 pharmacists. Masi is the head pharmacist. The hospital is always very busy, and Masi alone fills about 100 prescriptions in just 2 hours, as the clinic hours is from 2 to 4 p.m. You have to realize that 1 hospital and 1 drugstore is serving a good-sized city of 19,000. So I reflect on this as well, and to put out to our folks that are listening today, filling 100 prescriptions in 2 hours is not fun, whether it would be in 1942 or 2022-23. You are moving rapidly and making a lot of decisions. And if he were by himself handling everything else, Masi was 1 busy pharmacist, and it was pretty hectic. Kiku, though, has a request of the Bonomis. So she writes, sometimes when you have time, why don't you and the family come and visit us? Masi and I certainly do miss all of you, but hate to tell you to come because we could only talk to each other between a gate for only 1/2 hour. But if you do decide to come sometime, write to us in advance, as we have to get a permit 5 full days in advance. When I reflect on this, I did not realize the logistics that it took when you've been separated from your regular life, moved into this, and the rules that you had to follow, even to have something as simple as someone come visit you. A month later, John receives a letter from Masi. This is July 1st of 42, and he writes, the novelty of this center life has long wore off. The thought of the fun life outside makes us blue at times. Shig, and that is his brother, remember, the second individual listed on that letterhead, has been transferred to Camp Harrison in Indiana. He tried to get into the hospital pharmacy but was informed that no Japanese were accepted into the hospital, so he's now working as a boiler tender. And time again I've read this. If the Japanese American pharmacists were able to get transferred from the camps to other locations in the interior of the United States, it was a brick wall that they would run into when they tried to practice as a pharmacist. By and large, it simply did not happen. Massey has a drug request on that same letter to John Bonomi. I've been taking orders from friends and been sending them to Mr. Wise, who, from what I can surmise, is another drug distributor. But instead, this time, he says to John Bonomi, would you or could you use a few orders like that? Let me know if you can handle some. But in the meantime, will you please figure out how much it would cost for Johnson & Johnson's Belladonna plasters, a box of 2 dozen, Jerry's Deal for $1.99, and mentholatum, good old mentholatum, that he wanted the 60-cent size and a quarter dozen of those. A month later, there is good news. I found this very exciting. And this is written by Kiku and Massey. Dear folks, and this is to Mr. and Mrs. Bonomi, we are enclosing a pass for this Sunday afternoon. I've got the pass under the name of Kiyoshi Suzuki. Reason? We wanted to see you before you moved away. In other correspondence, we discovered the Bonomis are relocating to Long Beach, California. So had to use the other pharmacist's name since this Sunday is not our visiting day. Please do a little shopping for us again. Since they're coming, maybe they can bring some things. And they did. My mother wants a pair of nylon hose size 8.5. If not obtainable, 2 pairs of regular silk hose in the 4 thread count, 1 pound of Hill's coffee, 1 pound each of chocolate-covered raisins and peanuts, and 2 packages of thin lead for an ever-sharp pencil. Hastily yours, Kiku and Massey. And about a week later comes a lovely note from Massey to John Bonomi. A rather belated thank you note, but nevertheless, we appreciate your taking time to come and visit us. Thanks a lot again for bringing us candy. It helped make our anniversary party a much sweeter one. Kiku and I hope that our second anniversary will be spent in happier surroundings and under more enjoyable circumstances. We are constantly hoping and praying for that time of peace to come. And I reflect on this one and think, imagine this young couple and they're celebrating their first anniversary in an assembly center and hoping that this craziness will soon end and they can move back to a sense of normalcy. He does switch then to business mode. Johnny, will you send me an order of cash on delivery, COD, plus the taxes? We wanted V-Penta Pearl 600. The V-Penta can be 6 packages of the 100 counts or 12 of the 50 counts or something. In other words, we just need the V-Penta Pearls. Don't really care what size they come in. Just if you could send us 600 count of those, that would be fantastic. We don't hear a lot again until October 15th, and when a postcard is sent from Massey and Kiku, and it's even documented, it's October 15th, 6 a.m., which I thought was pretty fun to look at that. They must have popped it in the mailbox. Dear Johnny and Lillian, well, this is it, Arkansas bound. We left the racetrack yesterday at 9 a.m. After a good night's rest, we woke up and found ourselves somewhere in Arizona. The hospital staff and families occupy this car number 10, will write from the land of the Arkies soon. So they're headed away, Arkansas bound, for their next destination into the camps. There's another pharmacist that was at Santa Anita, and this was Frank Match Kumamoto. His nickname was Match. He wrote July 1st, and I apologize for the typo, that should be 1942. Please don't hold it against me for not writing sooner. We've been running around in circles ever since we came here. Now, he did not get to practice as a pharmacist. Instead, he ended up working on the national project, and as he has here, it was operated by the WWII, Works Progress Administration, making camouflage nets for the Army, and they were getting paid at the rate of $8 a month. He continued on, though, that they had a strike, and now they're getting better foods and $12 a month. As he notes, mind you, not $12 a week, but it's $12 a month. It's not fantastic. A month later, on August 22nd, Match had another letter to John Bonomi and says, well, we finally received our notice to leave for our new relocation project at Vacation, Wyoming, near Cody in the Heart Mountain. We're to leave on the 30th or 31st of August, that is, so I guess this will be my last letter until I get to the new camp. I guess it'll be plenty cold up there, so I'm stocking up on my red flannels. Well, so long, Johnny, until the next time. And that next time did come in October 11th of 1942. And I must tell you, now we started to get some more information where we get the sense of the change. To John Bonomi, he writes, sorry I didn't write right away, but ever since I came to Wyoming, I've been pretty busy. I started working in the hospital the day after I came here, and since everything were unsettled, it kept me pretty busy. Most of the stocks and drug supplies, which are furnished by the St. Louis Army Medical Depot, are not here, so we're having one heck of a time trying to fill the prescriptions of the doctors. We're getting some of the needed stock on an emergency purchase from a drugstore in Cody, Wyoming, so it helps a lot. And this always brings to mind, for me, how frustrating it must have been for the care providers in the camps, trying to help the people that were now there with acute conditions, chronic conditions, little kids up through the elderly, and they simply didn't have the materials that they needed. Match was also very honest in the fact that he writes of the area, well, Johnny, I hope I didn't bore you with this letter, but if you must know where we are here at Heart Mountain, this country is very bleak, and if you really want to know, as the residents around here call it, the country where God took his rest after making the rest of the U.S. and forgot to work on it afterward. Pretty telling, isn't it? Our next pharmacist is Matsunobe, and he's pictured here in his high school picture from 1926. Now, he and his wife Catherine arrived together in Boston on Saturday, May 9th at 4:30 in the afternoon. Many of you will recognize this one, and it went by several names: Boston, the Colorado River Project, etc. Now, for they themselves, they had to leave the Los Angeles area with only 48 hours notice, and as he noted, boy oh boy, it was hectic, shopping, rushing around, etc. This is a picture of what that camp looked like, and as Mutz noted, well, here we are in one of the best U.S. concentration camps of Anno Domini 1942. And they did model these camps after the barracks for the enlisted men as they were being housed, as they were being trained. That's a very different population than a population that does have men, women, children, babies, elderly. Where do you handle customs? Where do you handle regular family life? This is not your house on the corner. It's not an apartment building. They're barracks. So it's very, very difficult. And Mutz alluded to this in his next letter on June 7th, where he writes to Dear Johnny, me, myself, am a very sad Nikubone. I am putting in 8 hours every day at the hospital drug room and a half a day Saturday. We are short of almost every medicinal. It's terrible. Finally put through an order and am waiting for it to come. There are no catalogs, nothing whatsoever. And it continues even further. He explains this. At the camp, Boston, people are suffering a great deal from a form of diarrhea that lays them out. Cramps and high fever lasts 5 to 10 days. We are controlling it with paregoric and bis subnitrate mixture, but we're all out of cremocarb, Pepto-Bismol, never had any, and everything else. ASA, which is our abbreviation in pharmacy language for aspirin, tabs are all gone. And you can read the frustration when you read these letters, and you can hear it in their voices. We have terribly sick people. Something is going on. We don't even have the medicine to treat them. We're using paregoric, and the bismuth subnitrate mixture is similar to Pepto-Bismol, but there's nothing. Nothing. The doctors can check your patient over. The nurses can provide supportive care. The pharmacists can try to mix something, but where's the materials in the supply? So Mutz has a request for John Bonomi. In connection with this, Johnny, I might build up a pretty good account for you if you can get me credit for the usual time. You see, there are individuals that are willing to pay for medication, and since the hospital is unable to get it now and want me to order it for them. I took this matter up with my doctor friend who is the chairman of the medical staff, and he asked me to contact you immediately. He carries on. Catherine, which is his wife, is working too, but the lab equipment is so inadequate, and the hospital head, Dr. Schnurr, such an incompetent ass that she's mad clear through. The doctors are overworked and fed up, and I am too. And this is the best statement in this letter. Can't fill prescriptions with only air and water to work with. And you could just hear the sarcasm dripping out of his letter of the irony that they have the health professionals available. They can't do anything but pretend. They can try, they can diagnose, they can't treat because, as he says, you can't do much with just air and water. Things weren't really improving in July. Mutz wrote again to John Bonomi, but there was one positive. Thank you for your kindness in establishing credit for us. So we now have a line of communication between John Bonomi and Brunswig and the camps. The doctors are very grateful to you also and asked me to thank you. However, our difficulty is in dispensing the stuff. I sold all the DCP and the ferrous sulfate and some of the Navitol. These darn people expect everything free and don't realize that we are trying to help them by buying a few of the drugs which we have been unable to get. However, the hospital is sadly understaffed with doctors and nurses. I have plenty of pharmacists. There's 20 in Camp 1 and 5 in Camp 2, but we lack equipment and, above all, drugs. The administration here is so damn slow in gathering us medicines. Staff ordered 2 months ago and still hasn't come. I haven't a prescription scale in the drug department yet, which is pretty vital when you're working as a pharmacist, especially during those years. He notes as well of the precarious nature of the health situation in Boston in general in July of 1942. Lots of guys are dying off, especially the newborn. Many young people are seriously undernourished. I'm afraid that a great many are doomed to die here. These are actual conditions in the camp. I know that you, for one, wouldn't stand for the type of treatment we receive here if your family had to take it. There's sadness there, and the irony that there's not much they can do. On August 13th, there's one more letter coming from Mutz. The doctors run ragged and plenty sore at the whole business. As far as the dispatches of the pharmacy goes, our equipment is still zero. No scales, no spatulas, slab, mortar, or anything really essential. I get through by using volume measure, but that's not so accurate. Also, supplies are short, and this refers to what's in the actual hospital stocks. You could think of more bulk type things. We lack normal saline. That's one of our main fluids we use to resuscitate people when they're dehydrated, when they need surgery. Across the board, we use a lot of normal saline in the hospital. OB pituitary, that would be needed, as well as the urtitrate, often in labor delivery and gynecologic situations. Choramine, heart-related, and other things, the etc., until only a week ago. So you could think the first week of August, things are finally starting to roll in from the government supplies. However, that's some small proportion of the drugs. They don't still have their equipment. And speaking as a pharmacist, I can tell you behind the counter we have these things hidden away. Our scales, our spatulas, our slabs, and mortars. Because in those days, in the 40s, the receipt or the recipe, the RX that came from the physician many times had to be mixed from scratch. Not like today where you pour out of bottles and fill different things up. It was made individually. We have all these skills. I'm using my spatula here, how we mix on that slab or our mortar when we grind down the powders and put them into capsules or other pharmaceutical delivery methods. He got by volume measure, and that was basically taking things back and forth and going, yeah, I think that's about what it was. And as he admitted, it's not so accurate. He carries on, and this one relates to me to carry on with now our current generations of understanding what occurred in the 40s, of how awful it really was in the camps. Now this is summertime, remember this was August. Lots of heat rash, heat prostration, diarrhea, etc. And now the difficult situation. Now this isn't meant to be derogatory to the individuals for whom this was occurring. It was the fact of what was occurring in the camp. Some nutcases are cropping up now. Several have been taken to the Los Angeles Psycho. That would be the psychological ward, the psych ward, where you need definite mental health with a mental facility and hospital. A lot of it is due to shock, nervous strain, etc. Poor devils. We have also had several cases of attempted suicide. It's all very interesting, though trying phase. And he was correct. It was trying. Our next pharmacist is from a different camp, Manzanar, where not only was he there at the assembly center, but then as it flowed into the camp. Now, if you'd want to say the most business operation letters were coming from this gentleman, and yet there's a human side to him as well towards the end. He was your typical community pharmacist, and you could think of that corner drugstore where you have a little bit of everything, including your prescriptions. And as he states, I'm all right running a drugstore, but a hospital pharmacy is a little different. He initially asked for a blue book for ordering, and the connections then go on from there. So even when I was originally an early pharmacist in training, we did a lot of our ordering through catalogs and books. And definitely back in that day and age, in some of the letters they do note how they had all these different catalogs from the different drug companies whereby you would select what you wanted to order. And you often had access to these catalogs through these drug distributors. The Brunswig, the Bergen-Brunswig, that's who we are today, Cardinal McKesson, those different distributors. So David writes on June 3rd of 1942, Say, John, I owe you money for the digitalis. And I pause when I see this because digitalis is digoxin. That's one of our major medications. Even today we use for heart conditions. In that time, it would have been one of our main cornerstone medications for heart failure and for problems with your heart. Also, if you had chest pain, they sometimes did tap into this because we didn't have the nitroglycerin formats that we do today. He notes there's so much red tape that it takes about 2 weeks before we get our things. We now have a 10-bed hospital with an annex, but it's all filled up with measles, chickenpox, and all. Over 100 patients. And this also makes sense. You have a lot of people in close quarters, and at this point in time, there was not a vaccine for the chickenpox, and there wasn't the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. These are highly contagious, spread through respiratory secretions, coughing, and sneezing. So it's not a surprise that measles and chickenpox, even though it's June, exploded in this population. Bit later, August 7th, David writes to John asking for a favor. Could you pick up a package of UCL's potassium thiocyanate in the 3 milligram strength in a 100 count? He's asking this as he says, this is a favor one of the doctors wants done, so I'll appreciate it if you can help me out. And in the 10th, apparently David's been thinking a little bit and says, hello, John. If you can make connections and pick up a few items, you'll be able to make a few pennies. There's a new doctor here that's having the patients buy their own medicines, those that we don't carry in stock. If we can get together and divide 50-50 over the price you pay, we may be able to get together. Walt Tanaka and Shig Mayakawa suggested that you might be the right party. The pharmacists, and there are 5 of them, have decided it'll be swell, and we can get a fund up with the process. About a week later, David writes again and says, thank you for all the favors and for putting me on your account. So he did get to open up an account with Brunswig and John Bonomi servicing it. So everything so far has been swell. I wonder if you'll send us a few more items. So here he's looking for some kind of basic things, I kind of think. I also reflect that this might be some of his comfort level from that community pharmacy side. So there's 2 over-the-counter vitamins, basically a high-potency B-complex capsular vitamin. That's the first unit there. There's also Squibb's brand high-potency vitamin A, B, D, G in the capsular form in the 100-count bottles. Then he's also asking for a 1/4 dozen of an all-purpose cream made by the company Charms in the large size. and 3 dozen Colgate soaps, the 5 or 6 cent bar size, whatever size the bar soap was in the 5 cent or 6 cents, you could say, designation. And I find this interesting that he is writing for these products and like, okay, I'm going to go for a little bit bigger quantity that we can distribute out to our people. The letters continue September 18th with a couple more items to order, and this time he says just mail it directly to the hospital. 2 packages of Genseal Hepisprin in the 100 count, 2 packages of Benzedrine inhalers in the 60 counts. Also add in 2 packages of Vacagen, 2 packages of Mead's Viosterol and Halibut liver oil, the 50 cc, that's an injectable, I would imagine, possibly a liquid, a package of Oraton shearing in the 5 milligram strength, and a package of Lily's Multicibrin in the 30 count. Now this Benzedrine inhaler I always find interesting because Benzedrine was, you could imagine the equivalency would be an over-the-counter Primatene mist, or think about an albuterol meter dose inhaler. This we saw a lot of requests for in these letters, and my guess is it's for allergic rhinitis, for asthma type situations, opening up the airways with congestion and shortness of breath. The Vacagen was a fascinating product. I actually found one on eBay, and so I bought it, and I kept it sealed in the package because when you read what's on it, it has minuscule amounts of bacterial properties, and they thought it was to prevent influenza. I'm to this day not quite sure, but I go, oh, that's a fascinating thought. By the way, we don't make Vacagen tablets anymore. A large order occurred on October 5th. And as you can kind of scan through this one, what I look at a lot of it is there's some prescription type medication, these first ones, caripeptic liquid. Once again, there's a lot of GI distress in a lot of the letters that come through, and I can only imagine unusual and different food, different living situations. There could be some GI things, water supply, infectious disease, all of it put together that looks like across the board there were a lot of upset tummies. This time also there's denticators, clean between toothbrushes and refills, speaking to people who are looking for things to help with their dental health. Have their original toothbrushes and floss-like devices finally either worn out or run out? He asked for some more of the Vacagen product, some oleum percomorphum, some adhesives in one-piece widths. He didn't want strips, and once again, some cold cream, some soap, and Digitol. Things were kind of quiet until the next year in February 9. In fact, wait a minute, let's go back here. Yes, almost, 18 months. When you think about 42 to 44. And dear John, I bet you're surprised to hear from me. Gosh, what a difference to be out of camp. We never realized how free you can be regardless of prejudices and rationing. And we know from the postmark of the letter he's now in Zeeland, Michigan. He's no longer in Manzanar. Oh yes, I think I mentioned it, but I'm out here by myself. My wife and babies will stay in camp until June when I plan to pick them up. So the interface now between these stories that came out of the camps from the pharmacists with the stories that are forthcoming now is a little bit different. We've just envisioned the scenario that was occurring within the assembly centers and the camps, listening to the pharmacists, what they were trying to provide for care, and highlighting those transitions between the assembly centers and the concentration camps. However, another scenario was playing out with TK Pharmacy, which was that independent pharmacy in Denver. Now remember, it's located outside that exclusion zone, so it's not along that west coast coming down Washington, Oregon, and California. We're over in Colorado. So the question, and as we can see here, this is from one of the letterheads of TK Pharmacy. Why and how did Yutaka Terasaki provide pharmacy services to Japanese Americans in the camp? Now, I was super lucky in search of these letters. My journey did take me to Denver, as you saw, and I was fortunate around that visit and afterwards to talk with Tak's youngest brother, Sam Terasaki. Sam was a kid when the war broke out. He was junior, senior-ish age in high school. And as he said, he doesn't know why these letters were saved. Why did Tak tuck them in the walls, or who tucked them in the walls? And we only can hypothesize what the thoughts were. Was it so we did not forget? So we would make sure that we wouldn't do this again. I'd like to think that they meant it to be a message for all of us here in the future and now the present from the past. But anyways, remember when I had us look at that brick building and that FM hall was at the top? Well, from the 1905 Bolton and Pharmacy, this is basically an advertisement of the 8 sell-right druggists. So this would be like the Rite Aid druggists or the CVS pharmacists from that time. And these 8 all work with sell-right. And there's Frank M. Hall, and look at that, 27th and Larimer Street. Now, is that not the corner where our drugstore is located? It is indeed. I always think that's kind of fun. But back in 1905, this building was originally a pharmacy, one of the very first ones in that Denver area. Also, what I find I love to see, like I said, I like to see who the people are that we're working with and who we're discussing. So this is Yutaka Terasaki in 1932 in the high school yearbook. And I thought this is just kind of fun to see who our gentleman is that we're referring to. And also posted in genealogical materials now are copies of the draft cards of all of our men and what these looked like. I had never seen a draft card, so I found this absolutely fun to look at. But I want you to look here at the date, 1940. So this is before Pearl Harbor. And if you note, his name who would be contacted if something should occur is his wife, Michi Terasaki. I also want you to note another piece here. Look at this. Employer's name is Thomas Kobayashi, and the place of the business is the 2700 Larimer, which is indeed where that FM Hall building where TK Pharmacy existed at the building. So going on further with Mr. Kobayashi, we also can see his draft card, which happened at the same time. His name is here, and when we come down to Mrs. Haruko Kobayashi, this is Tak and Sam's older sister. So, long story short, Thomas and Tak and Haruko all have this connection together. And from the 1940 census, it actually gets a little deeper. So Thomas Kobayashi at the 1940 census was, look at this, a pharmacist for a retail drug company. My guess is of TK Pharmacy. And does that not fit nicely? TK Pharmacy. Ultimately, in 1944, he became a physician. And it's my understanding that that upper layer of that building was where he had offices for the medical practice. And then the pharmacy was located on the lower level. As we continue through, the thing I found quite fascinating was how the letters and postcards arrived near and far to TK Pharmacy. This was not unusual. This one comes Rivers, Arizona. And you can see from the postmark here. And the other part that was very always, I don't know if disconcerting is the word I want or a little bit jarring, is the postmark on the correspondence. Detained alien enemy mail, examined, and by the individual, by the United States. So you know that these letters that were received were first analyzed by the censors to see what was in them, if there was any information that should not be shared or anything that was make them suspicious of doing some untoward activity. Remember though, these are regular people, just like our brothers and sisters, moms, dads, aunts, uncles, grandmas and grandpas, even just like us or our kids. But they are in the camp. The letters always had pretty much the same start. Dear Tak. Now this one, while it's really hard to read here, I'll read it for you. So, sorry I was unable to see you before I left. Arrived safely but half dead. Made to wait 20 hours in the middle of the desert, a small junction, no place to go, just sit. It's paragraph 1. Starting here, say Tak, can you send me some bento chocolate candies? If you can, please send me 4 boxes, 6 boxes of bento toffee, and all the candy bars you can spare. Will you send it? Thanks. Larry Inoue and 317-6-A, that's our divisions of the parts in that camp, and he was at Poston, Arizona. Now you can see here that he notes what he sent, his order number, and the date, 10/18 of 43. And I'm trying to remember if I noted when this letter was sent. I do not have it, but that was one set of correspondence. And throughout this now, we're going to take a peek. A lot were written in the Japanese characters in the script, and what I discovered from Sam, is he does remember that Tack had hired a woman that read correspondence written in Japanese and translated as best as she could. Naturally, a dream would be to work with someone that could read through these and translate what the meaning was and what was being asked. But in the meantime, we do get the gist of what was going on and the correspondences that were happening back and forth. Another question that's always been asked is, how did people find TK Pharmacy? It's not like Denver is an easy place to get to during these times. So why Denver? Why TK Pharmacy? Why TAC? And slowly bits and pieces have been pieced together. One is this one, for example. I saw your advertisement in the Colorado Times today and was very much relieved. That's this first paragraph that this woman wrote. And it's like, okay, an advertisement in the Colorado Times. All right, getting a sense. And then it was advertised in the Rocky Shimpo that you had some sake to sell. There's a lot of sake that was sold, quite a bit, with some interesting methods of how they transmitted their requests. But Rocky Shimpo, very classic, widely read publication, and TAC had an ad in there that obviously caught the interest of the individuals that had that curiosity of, where can I have a resource? This letter was from a patient, I shouldn't call them a patient, from an individual that wrote, he was just pretty much desperate. And this is Manzanar, and it kind of breaks your heart because he writes, kindly send me a soap, a good one, or coffee, candy, shaving blades, iron, wine, smoked fish, or something, one of them. Please don't send back my check. Send me anything. Thank you. And this one points to the frustration of living in your not normal situations, and what do you do? One gentleman, George Hashimoto, it was addressed from the Butte Hospital in Rivers, Arizona, asked for a product called Iridol A. And so I was curious about this one, and it's interesting. We do not have anything that I am aware of that's anything near this. But a molasses-flavored syrup of water, let's start over. A molasses-flavored syrup of water-miscible forms of vitamins A, E, D, and K, as well as vitamin C, B-complex vitamins, and other vitamins plus zinc. So in other words, a liquid formulation of a vitamin. This person was writing from the hospital in Ward D. So my question is this person a patient in the hospital and needed a water-soluble vitamin? They weren't able to get that. He couldn't do tablet forms of vitamins. And so he wrote to TAC for advice on, please, could you ship me a bottle of Iridol A? Vitamins, however, were very common, and it's partially due to the times. If you look in any old women's magazines or newspapers, or even the very old Time magazines, there's a lot, or at least fairly frequent, advertisements for vitamins and minerals. This was the thing of the time. And to some extent, I can't help but think, coming out of the Great Depression, when nutrition could have been lacking at times, vitamins started to find their way and come to the fore, especially because due to technology and to manufacturing, finally able to widespread make vitamins and produce them and send them out to the public. This person, though, is asking for Vims. Vims was an extremely popular vitamin. It's like our Centrum, our Geratols of our present time, but it was Vims back then in the 40s. He asked for a quoted price or send one COD to him in the camp. And he asked, please rush. Wasn't just over-the-counter products that were requested, but also goods, products. This person is asking about if TAC receives alarm clocks from the factory, could one be sent to him? Not just alarm clocks, but also clothing irons to iron your clothes. Another picture of an iron as well. And even something as simple as copying paper, just paper to write on. This is in April 29th of 1943, so we're moving on through. Simple things like battery and film, though much desired and asked for, they were on allocation by the government restrictions due to the war effort and allocated over to those fighting in the wars on the eastern and the western fronts. So a person from the Hart Mountain camp did ask and said, thank you for the kind letter. Now, I look at this letter, one thing that pops to mind is it's typewritten. So when you went to the camps and you could typically take only what you could carry, all I think is, did this gentleman, James Yonemura, was one of his important things that he brought with him, his typewriter? And it very well could have been. But he did write back that yes, he would indeed like the planned flashlight batteries when they received them. And also, if you happen to have any of the 120 size roll films, could you send them to me as well? About 6, if you could supply them. As we know, that was tougher to come by, but people still requested. One of my other interesting letters that I interpret as someone wanted wood, alcohol, and emery cloths. I am thinking for crafting purposes, for getting into with some woodworking. This person actually sent and tore this part of their label off and sent it in the letter because this is what they wanted. I think it was, just so I don't provide any confusion in my correspondence, please send me the following: some denatured alcohol, wood alcohol, 2 pints please, and an emery cloth of the fine kind, 2 to 3 pieces. Hair dye was extremely popular within the camps, the request for this, and seemingly the favorite one was the company Godefroy's Coloring for Hair. Typically they wanted the straight black color, and this is a very nicely written letter where you can see this request, asking for 3 packages. It became such a high request, and I'm going to guess far exceeded what TAC typically kept in the store, so he went directly to Godefroy's to ask, could he set up an account? Now, I admit, a little bit of pushback I felt came from the hair coloring company, because they said, oh, why don't you have the people write directly to us and we can send it to you and you can send it to them? Well, if the people have to write directly to the company, can't they just send it straight to the people? So end of the day, not quite sure what ultimately happened, but irregardless, lots of letters for Godefroy's hair coloring in black. This one caught my attention in the request for the 30, as in a number 30 count, is how I interpreted it, aspirin compound. So ASA is aspirin and then a compound. This is something we very similar have today. It's an aspirin and typically caffeine and sometimes a little bit of barbital for migraines. Migraines possibly also for pain. And TAC then was able to complete this order through his notations to send to this person. We're moving into the sense now where what we're going to see is a lot of requests for GI complaints and how to help them. This person wrote asking for the combination of belladonna, strychnine, and cascara number 2. So cascara is like the medications we use now for constipation. Belladonna and strychnine would also help usually slow things down. So the combination of all these in one product is no different today when we have our combo products to help with diarrhea and constipation. Another person, though, however, asked for strontium bromide, sodium bromide, and essence of pepsin, once again looking more at the side of how I interpret this, digestive aids to help with purely digestion. My guess is, as we talked about earlier, the different food, the different living situations, lack of clean water, diarrheal episodes, that there were a lot of GI distress situations going on, and people were going back to their remedies that had worked for them at home. They just now had to find a pharmacy that could send those products to them. Another patient requested Baratsu ghee, which the Baratsu part, what I've investigated, it's a glycerin-based product. And initially, TAC was going to send him milk of magnesia tablets, which makes me think this was related to something that was constipation. But I'm wondering if he picked these BNS tablets instead, because this was a glycerin base. So think mineral oil, think glycerin suppositories, and wondering if he's like, no, let's send this product instead. I think it would be closer to what the person was anticipating. However, it points yet again, different camp, different time frame, but once again, GI distress. One patient was particular in wanting acid and dyspepsia tablets, so acid indigestion, bay rum, jolly pills, and some Labilius, I believe. So he wanted, or she in particular, wanted this bay rum product. They sent the label off of their old bottle, and as we move forward, please ship the attached articles that the patient previously had bought at the Owl Drug Company. Also right here was a note, Owl Store. So that's where they had purchased that once, an Owl Store. So our patient was looking for these products. TAC provided some similar, if not identical things, and sent them via COD to our patient. Another individual wrote very concisely here, kindly please send me 1 dozen of skin sacks as soon as you can. Thank you. Now, skin sacks is what you may or may not be recognizing as just regular old condoms. Condoms were used for multiple purposes in the camps, from the typical usage, prevention of venereal diseases, as well as prevention of pregnancy, but also because of the product, for anything that was getting blown with dirt and dust that needed covering and protected from that abrasiveness and the problems with that. You could then use condoms to also help cover those different items. From the other side of the coin, we had a patient request some Spanish fly. Now, depending what population we're talking to today and what generation you come from, you may recognize Spanish fly. The active ingredient in it is cantharidin, and this is a severe irritant when you ingest it orally, to the point that when it's metabolized and excreted out of the body, the irritation continues, including in the testes, urethra, and penis, resulting in a lot of swelling resembling a long-lasting erection. So it's, to some extent, you could think of it as a very old-fashioned Viagra-type medication, but as TAC noted at the bottom of this card, no. It was just a simple no. We also saw requests for 2 treatments for gonorrhea, balsam coplico and Inue's megasuri. There were no notes provided with this, as they have here, Jap, or a Japanese medicine. And if I remember, the notes on the backside of this letter is that TAC wrote back to the individual that they needed to reach out to the camp doctors to, number 1, verify, and then number 2, get treated. From the Granada camp in Amache, Colorado, came a request for an abortifacient. There were not many letters along these lines, but there were things asking for folk remedies to try that did make you pause when you read them, realizing the severity of the situations that were transpiring in these communities, of the points of desperation in this time as well as others that people were facing. Many people were asking for products to treat hay fever. Good old sniffly, runny noses, allergic rhinitis, hay fever as they term. This patient asked for 2 bottles of Estivan. Now, this is not the first time this product was asked for, and this is what it looks like. Estivan for the relief of hay fever. Now, when I looked the product up, I was kind of surprised, because this is what it says: a processed infusion of rose petals. I am not quite sure how an infusion of rose petals could do a lot for hay fever or allergic rhinitis, but if the product worked for people, at least I have the sense it's not going to hurt anybody. There's also a lot of requests for eye drops. So when I think of the perspective of the human as well as the pharmacist providing this, we have requests for bronchodilators, requests for albuterol-like drugs for the lungs. We have requests for drops for irritated eyes, requests for medicine to help with a runny nose. This to me makes me think of the locations where these camps were and how they were desolate, they were windy, they were dusty, and they kicked up a lot of irritants. And it was reflected in these upper respiratory location of maladies that were hopefully not enough to bring a person down to needing to go to the doctor, but at the bare minimum were very irritating. There were some fun letters in here too, and I enjoyed this one as the writer was very succinct. Gentlemen, I am enclosing $5, and so I can specify this. I will write out $5 by money order, for which please send me the following articles. 5 4-ounce jars of Liberdol, 5 capsaicin plasters, pores by Johnson & Johnson, 1 box good cold tablets to rid fever, and not aspirin. She's very specific. I believe this is a woman writing. Very, very specific. I do not want aspirin. 1 dozen boxes Smith Brothers cough drops, the red ones. So I looked these things up. The Liberdol is a cream, a topical, that I believe, based off of the ingredients, look at some of these, sanguinaria, Malayuca, lobelia, capsaicin, and tobacco. Not sure where the tobacco comes in, but this product, as you say, it's for colds, croup, broncho disorders in general, and acute inflammation of, I'm going to say, respiratory tract, lungs, nasal passageways. I'm thinking this is like a Vicks that we use today. Rub on the chest, put a cloth over it, and breathe the vapors to help open up the airways. The Smith Brothers had a couple types of cough drops, but indeed they had a wild cherry brand that were the red ones. Many requests in especially the Boston area for treatments for malaria. TAC did send this individual a dozen quinine tablets, and as we see in this next letter, cinchona, once again a derivative of quinine. So it was quite apparent by the individuals that were writing in, there was a need for management of malarial symptoms. I did a little quick look. Cinnamon oil was also asked to help with this. Did it really work a lot? That I am not entirely aware of. From afar, TAC also got a request from a family of this. Ask TAC. We have a 5-year-old and a baby. They feel itchy on their rectum, and in the morning on the bed sheets find worms. Maybe also found worms in the underpants. And so TAC wrote the note Ascaris, which is a worm. Not unusual to find this in the dirt. And I can imagine you've got little kids, 5-year-old and a baby. Is a baby more like a toddler? And they're playing around in the dirt. They ingest some of the dirt and you get the worms. The worms then need to be treated. And so they did resolve that. TAC consulted with that family to figure out how to manage worm treatment from a distance. This was, I believe, the actually only letter I found that's a pharmacist to pharmacist communication in the correspondence materials from TAC's letters that were in the walls of the pharmacy. This one highlights is a very formal business letter coming from a pharmacist that's in the camp at Rivers, Arizona, so down there in the area we've been speaking about, asking TAC if he would purchase some stock drugs that he brought with him. He says they're in good working order. Would you possibly like them? What I can't decide when I read this letter, is it possible that our patient here, that our pharmacist here, realized that he wouldn't be able to use them within the camp, and so he was trying to just get them out of his hair, or possibly was looking for a way to recoup a little bit of money. The products that are here are 2 types. One is the sodium amytal in pulvules, which would be more of a solid dosage form, and also capsules of nembuphedrine. These both TAC did agree that it's like, I could take those off your hands, but he did decline the adrenaline products, which are these bottom 2. Even though one was rubber stoppered and cork stoppered, they're only 1-ounce vials, they're not super large, but TAC did decline them. And my guess, it was the concern of risk of compromise of the products, or many possibly not being able to analyze them ahead of time if there were any kind of infiltrates to worry about safety and use in humans. So, as we conclude our time here today, the challenges faced by Japanese Americans within the camps in America seems almost insurmountable at times. The utilization of relationships outside the barbed wire sustained and maintained the individuals. Their stories of resiliency resonate even from their letters today when we look at them in the year that we are now. And there's much we can learn from the individuals that survived through this very, very tenuous time. At this time, I'm actually going to go forward a slide and then I will come back. I owe a deep amount of thanks and gratitude to Sam Terasaki for relaying to me not only his stories from the war, but also what he knew of little bits and pieces of his brother Tak. Also to the Tadaima organizers for inviting me to participate in your function this year. To the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles, thank you much for coordinating a visit to your archives to view the letters between the pharmacist and John Bonomi. I owe you tremendously and appreciate so much that opportunity. And I also want to extend a huge thank you to the Densho Museum in Seattle. Once again, allowing me, I had a 3-day visit to view the TK Pharmacy letters in their early stages, as well as the accompanying documents that Tak had tucked away. And most grateful that all of us now can access those letters and view them through the Densho Digital Repository as listed here. So as I close today, I'm very happy to continue any future conversations that you may have or questions. I have my email here, so at any time, if you would like to reach out and connect, I'd be happy to do so. Thank you so much for having me today and this opportunity, and I look forward to communicating with some of you in the future.